The music business is in serious trouble. Or is it? That all depends on your perspective. Let's talk about it. From New York City, this is How to Fix the Music Business. Welcome to this episode of How to Fix the Music Business. I'm your host, Jim McDermott, and I am so excited about this episode. Today, our guest is Sandy Smallens. Sandy is an incredible guy. There's so many people in this business, in the digital music business, who base their opinions on conjecture and not on experience. And Sandy is one of those rare people who has been in the digital music business literally since it started. He started actually in a band called Too Much Joy, which was a really cool indie rock band that started in the 80s and was signed to a major label, and then moved on to be one of the first people in the music business who actually ran a new media department at a major label in the mid-90s. Went on to work at Prodigy, SonicNet, Vivendi, Oddcast, a bunch of different radio groups, and most recently was head of artist marketing and original content at Spotify. Sandy really does know where all the bodies are buried in the digital music business. He's got a new company called Audiation that focuses on podcasting and original storytelling. And in this really wide-ranging podcast, we discuss the economics of the streaming world for artists and for labels, the inner workings of exclusives on streaming services, the value proposition of music, how to market yourself as an artist in this new world, and what it was like marketing yourself in the old world. This is a long podcast, but to be able to listen to somebody with this level of real experience at so many different companies rap about all this stuff, to me, is solid gold. I hope you'll agree. So I'd like to welcome to the show my really good friend, Sandy Smallens. Welcome, Sandy.
Hey, Jim, what's up?
First thing I wanted to ask you was, the outward disposition you project is one of the eternal optimist. So, and I don't know if that's a correct assumption to make or not, but how do you feel about the state of the music business today? And is it positioned to move forward in a positive way, or do you feel that generally the dark clouds still linger?
That's so funny. Until recently, I had the term cynical optimist in my description, my Twitter handle, my Twitter bio. So that's really funny. That pretty much captures how I feel about it. Honestly, from the inside, from the last 4+ years I spent running original content and artist marketing with Spotify, I was very optimistic because I looked at it through the eyes of a former full-time musician, and I said, oh my God, if my band had only started in 2008 instead of 1987, we'd be golden, because there's so many ways to reach an audience nowadays that there weren't back in the day. Of course, you had all the gatekeepers, and there was radio, and then eventually there was MTV. That was kind of like started gaining importance sort of mid-career for our band, which was called Too Much Joy. And but nowadays there's so many ways to get out to people. And one of the things that was a big factor for us was that people liked our songs when they heard them on the radio, but we didn't necessarily move units in a store. And it's probably a combination of many things, including the fact that we're not sure our records are always getting to the store.
Yeah, that's a good assumption, I think. Yeah.
Through Giant, when we were on tour, we were finally signed to Giant Warner Brothers, Irving Azoff's label, and we'd go to the record stores during the day, and when we show up in town, because we were very anal retentive, as you might imagine, as a band. We would set up all our own interviews, and we had a great team of publicists and stuff working with us, but we were very on top of it. We'd get to town, we'd go to the record store, we'd check to see if our records were in the bins, and generally they were not. So having a top 10 modern rock, as they called it, record back in the day didn't always translate to sales. Sometimes that would get blamed on us. The finger would turn around from us too, from ourselves or our management, and frequently the label, they go, you know what, it's a turntable hit. It sounds great in the radio, but it's not moving units. And we're like, okay, but there are no units to move in this town. But nowadays, consumption can drive a career. And that's a very exciting change. And that is the thing that makes me optimistic for musicians and bands that are coming up. Because Jim, and this is probably true about you as well, although I will not deign to speak for you, none of the bands that changed my life, that made me a musician or made me want to work in the music industry, ever made a living off of record sales. I mean, until their very end of their career, people maybe like the Clash and stuff, and God bless. I hope the Joe Strummer estate does very well, obviously, but that took a long time. But if you look at bands like Mekons, Gang of Four, Descendants, these guys weren't exactly like paying mortgages with record sales.
Yeah.
They were, out on the road touring, selling merchandise. It was anathema. No one was doing, commercials. And nowadays that's sort of like bread and butter for bands. And like that's a goal. But so sales alone were never in our heads. Oh, yeah, we're going to like retire on our royalties from our record, Son of Sam I Am.
Do you think now in the new world that an artist is going to be able to make money and not have to worry about going out and getting a label to spend a couple of $1 million promoting them and then get nothing at the end of the day?
Absolutely. One of my biggest joys in my Spotify job, and even now, is working with or advising bands who come to me. I mean, I still get hit up every day on like LinkedIn or wherever from like aspiring artists, aspiring bands, and if I check them out and I'm interested in them, I will engage with them and say, hey, this, here's my opinion, great stuff. Let me see if I can make some intros for you or whatever, or really love what you're doing, keep going. But I think there was so much waste in the traditional 80s, 90s. Well, I mean, obviously earlier too, but when I was engaged in it, in the recording process. I mean, think about it. My band's record, Serial Killers, which ended up selling, over time has sold over 100,000 units, which nowadays would be like, oh my God.
You could buy a house if you'd sold that yourself, right? I mean, if you
Yeah,
were a solo artist and you sold
exactly.
100,000 albums, yeah.
Yes, we could have all bought nice, maybe small but nice houses. But now, yeah, the intro record deal was like 12%, 13% royalty rate, and first they recoup everything. Why am I spending six figures to record a pop punk record, and staying at the Oakwood in LA, which we have, had to trash because that's what bands do. So there goes more money out the pocket, and working in Steve Vai's studio, because that was how the whole industry was set up. And frankly, if the label didn't invest at that level in the band, nobody took it seriously in the major label system. Nowadays I feel like, and it's not just because of Pro Tools and home studios, because I think you have to, bottom line, as everyone from you, me, Bob Lev says, you have to have a great song and record it and capture a great performance. And not every band can do that just because like the bass player knows how to use Pro Tools. I think there's still a huge role for mentorship and artist development, but it's those departments, as we know, have been gutted at the labels. So that sort of mentorship now comes through freelance producers or managers. You're going to see managers taking on a lot more of that role. And I think that's actually a very good development, because what it does is it frees you from the having to take a bigger investment from the label. I tell any band that comes to me that the last thing you should do is sign to a major label, and only if you're a pop band that needs to get commercial radio play should you sign to a major label. Now lately I've been seeing indie labels, like even like these startup like cassette only labels and stuff, I've been seeing them start to act like major labels and trying to sign brand new indie artists who self-recorded to like 3 record deals and first look on everything and taking the majority of any licensing money that comes in. I'm like, so there's this disease in the whole label system that's even infecting some of the indies. So I feel like to the extent that an artist or a band can do everything on their own, they should. And if it's good, they will find a way to find an audience. And then people like Spotify will find out about it.
If you're an artist that doesn't have a label, doesn't have anybody investing in you, you're one of millions of people that are putting their stuff up on Spotify. Okay, it's there. How do you develop an audience to get to the point where you get enough listeners where Spotify is going to pay attention to you and decide to elevate you?
You have to know your genre and your media, right? So like I'm most familiar with like the live band, element, because that's where I come from. We literally booked our own tours. We like played the same clubs, slept on the same couches, and with the same groupies as like REM and the Replacements. Unfortunately, did not yield the same results. Nowadays, if you're a live band, I mean, I've been blown away by the quality of musicianship by most of the live bands that I brought through the office in the last 4 years for Spotify sessions. Just like to a person, everyone could play like motherfuckers. Are we allowed to curse on this?
You're encouraged to curse, Sandy.
Okay, don't say that. So, to a person, this whole sort of myth that, oh, like everyone having their own digital studios and the ability to cut and paste and Pro Tools and stuff is ruining musicianship. I think it's the other way around. I think people have gotten, they learn faster, they wood shop, they really hear how to make things better. But until you play live and until you play your brand new song that you just wrote in your bedroom in front of other people, you don't really know if it's good or not. And so if it's a live instrumentation thing, you have to play. And I don't care if it's on your sidewalk, local coffee shop, go to places that don't necessarily normally have gigs. You have to fight to get your music in front of other people. Now, if it's more like a turntable EDM, like techno thing, I'm sort of out of that scene a little bit more. I mean, I have, a lot of admiration for folks who've been able to build their careers that way, but it's not something that it's native to me. But then you have to go to where that music is appreciated. And most bands, I mean, unless they're like total assholes, most bands are okay with receiving an unsolicited demo or a link to a SoundCloud, or I wouldn't send anyone a CD because most people I don't think have CD players anymore, but some sort of communication from an unknown artist who's like, we love you guys, would you just check out our music? I mean, that happened to us on the road all the time. I mean, we people that gave us our demo tapes like lit ended up doing very well, and we're like, oh shit, these guys are really good. Of course, in our case, we're probably intimidated and go, oh, we better throw this tape out the window because they're too good. But we were so neurotic and self-conscious. But I do think there's a way to network amongst the people who make the sort of music you're trying to make, and I think that's job number one. And I also think I'm not averse to a great cover that's good. Not just like, oh, she sang a really good version of this Adele song, but like Devo playing the Rolling Stones, or in our case, Too Much Joy trying to play an LL Cool J song. Like, I think a really scientific and interesting and like completely different take on a well-known song can speak volumes for people and open up a lot of doors.
So the challenge of an artist having really good material, writing good material, dedicating themselves to that, we then get to this other challenge, which is then you have to have somebody in your organization who really knows how to promote in a way that isn't going to piss people off, isn't going to sound tacky, and they have to have fluency with all the tools out there to do this.
So much pressure today
Yeah.
on artists to be entrepreneurs. I mean, it's with all of the new avenues of exposure come all of the stress of, what if you're just not good at social media and no one in your you have to have someone around you who is. If it's a friend who offers to help out, and not even in a managerial perspective, but it's like, hey, I really like your band. Let me show you guys how to present yourselves on Instagram. Let's find this guy or girl who does like, these awesome animated GIFs and have them do like a lyric video for us. You have to have someone in your orbit. I think it's unfair to expect artists to be good at everything, just like it's unfair to expect any person or young person in a professional field to be good at everything. But they do have to know someone who is, and that might be a friend. And down the road, that's why you have a new career. Like, this is like, if they could afford someone like you, that would be ideal. But I do think there's a very interesting economy of people rising up who are starting to specialize in digitally marketing artists independently, outside of just like traditional PR, which is still important, and traditional radio promotion, which is, I think at this point, unless you're a pop band, I don't even know why you'd bother with radio. It's paying for radio promotion. And people like you who are like, social media specialists and who, understand what works in each medium. I think, people like that, yes, you need to find like your friends and amateurs who have that skill set, and as you start making money playing shows, or perhaps you score like some like low-key ad or something, maybe you start to develop or start clocking Bandcamp downloads. Maybe you can start to employ professionals who do that for you. But if you can't do it, you need to find someone who can.
Based on my own experience working with artists and trying to populate and maintain a persistent social presence, Some artists are really good at it because they have a good work ethic and they're interesting and they're invested and they don't just talk about themselves and say, hey, the new single is out. You know, they might talk about a movie they like, or they might talk about food that they like, or something that's compelling. But a lot of artists can't. I don't know if this is your experience at all, but I find that you work with some people, you explain everything to them, they process it, they intellectualize it, but for whatever reason, it's really difficult to extract that out of them because some people just will never be good at it. The thing I think about a label and about the release cycle in the old days of the label was the artist drummed up to this record release, and it might have been a year of their lives or a couple years of their lives, and then they had this whole team around them that put a lot of focus on it for albeit a limited amount of time. But then when that time was done, when all the singles had come out and they had done the tour and everything, and they went away for a little while, it could be quiet. And they could have a little mystery and they could recharge their batteries and they could get creative again. And now I think the problem is that there's no off switch on your career.
It's very true. I mean, I still feel like a lot of that is genre dependent, right? Like, I think in some cases it's really okay for like EDM artists to be extraordinarily mysterious and non-visual and kind of like really low key and just let their music and their remixes do the talking, and those tend to be artists I think that do need to release things over a steady drip. I mean, I'm hard pressed to understand, once again, in the same way that I don't feel like most people need to be on major labels or most people need to be in pop radio, I don't understand why most people need to have event releases. Like if you're Kanye or Jake, yeah, you need a really big first week to make sure you get on all these playlists. But if you're an artist, and because once you're on those playlists, that's like, you know, a recurring revenue stream that never goes away. But if you're an artist that no one hears about and no one's going to give a shit that you're releasing a record and you've made a big deal, hey, our record's coming out, record release day, blah blah blah, we're going to do a record release party. Like if no one knows who you are, no one gives a shit, and they're going to have to discover you over time. And so it's almost like you have to go against the whole, you know, big opening release week mentality and go to the steady drip mentality of which you were just speaking. You know, you maybe you don't put everything out at once. Maybe you say, guess what, we're going to release a song a month, you know, and then we're going to, like, based on your feedback, we're going to like remix it, or based on your feedback, we're going to figure out which song to release next, or maybe we update the lyrics. I mean, I don't think he did this on purpose, but I think the fact that Kanye released The Life of Pablo and then was continuing to update it, at least on Tidal, I don't know if he did the same on Spotify and stuff when it finally got there. Right. I think he accidentally came across a very, very interesting model. And I think the reason he came across it is because he never really knows when he's finished with something, and no one will step up and say, Kanye, you're done to him anymore because he's too big. But I think that is an interesting model. And for some types of music, it might make sense. Like if I'm a band and instead of releasing an album on, you know, like the first Tuesday or the first Friday in June, I say we're going to release music every month, and some of it might be, you know, we'll release a studio version, and then we're going to go play 3 shows, and we're going to release the live version, like, you know, mid-month, you know, like everything's on, you know, everything's up for grabs. People can do whatever they want now. I don't see why, like, a band that's just starting out has to hew to the rules of the old music industry. In fact, I think it hamstrings them, and that's why you get we released our album and nothing happened, so we're fucked, you know? That's why, because people are playing by the old rules.
Yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned it, because this article, I don't know if you read it, by Roy Trakin just came out recently about Are Traditional Release Dates Dead? And he was talking about Radiohead and Kanye and Beyonce and all that stuff, and kind of saying that they were dead. But there was part of me that thought, yeah, you know, you can do this big look at me thing and just drop something if you're one of those artists, because your fans are hanging on your every move. You have their sustained attention. But if you're trying to get attention, if a new act just says, "Oh, I just dropped my album on Saturday," everybody's like, "Okay, who gives a shit?" Because we're not talking about stuff that's really that new, Sandy, right? I mean, no. Like if you look at, let's say, the history of Rough Trade in the UK, okay, the Normal, right? Like came in with a single and said, "Hey, would you put this out?" I pressed 400 of them. And then just saw how it went. And then, okay, well, maybe I should do another one. And then, okay, and then maybe I should do an album. So it's not like any of this is really, really that new thinking. I mean, I think the Kanye thing is interesting because he put out a record and then and it kind of maybe wasn't finished or it was a work in progress. And I can't really recall any artist who's put out a work in progress. Usually everybody's so neurotic about making it perfect. It's kind of cool to put out something with flaws. That's not a bootleg. But a lot of these ideas and a lot of these themes are not new things. They're things that if you spend a lot of time in the music industry, there's a lot of metaphors and analogies you can make to other things that have already been done.
Crowdfunding is just like old school patronage by another name. You're absolutely right. I mean, the album was an invention of the music industry to sell more music to an audience that might not be interested in every single song. I mean, so yeah, everyone said, "Oh, are we going back to a singles culture?" We're already there. The question is, like you said, it's how do you maintain attention? And I just think, yes, the only people who can pull off the stunt releases are superstars who became superstars under the old rules. And that includes Kanye, Beyonce, even Radiohead, even though they messed around with all different ideas. I mean, and then they, declared how they hate everything. Meanwhile, their new record's going to be on Spotify next week. I mean, you still ultimately you need to be present and available. Your music needs to be everywhere. You can't not be available. That scarcity doesn't work in this environment anymore. So
it's an interesting comment from somebody who was responsible for creating exclusive content at Spotify up until very
but our
recently.
exclusive content. You know what though? From day one, I said to Ken, my boss, Ken Parks, a fantastic human being, by the way. I said to him, listen, if we're going to do exclusive stuff, it needs to be stuff that we produce ourselves, not like fighting, that red ocean over like, a weak window on this record or that record. And even, I feel like Daniel feels this way. I know Steve Savoca feels this way. Like music, the studio releases that the artist releases, fighting over a week or two exclusivity there is really, a sucker's game. But if I'm going to invest in bringing a band in and having them rearrange some of their songs and play them acoustically and stuff, hell, that'll be exclusive on Spotify. But honestly, generally those windows were very short, and after those windows, pretty short, and after those windows expired, nothing would make me happier, and it's already happened a lot, than seeing a label and an artist say, we love this performance on this Spotify session so much, we're going to release it as an official track, we're going to put it through iTunes. Like that made us ecstatic because it established that we were curating performances that were so valuable to the artists that they felt they should spread them elsewhere. So that that was the ultimate goal. My goal was to see the temporarily exclusive content that we invested in and produced become important material for the band. But that's different than taking a studio recording and saying, oh, we're only going to give it to this company that we own like a percentage in, and we're going to screw over those Spotify guys, but then when we give it to Spotify 2 weeks later, we're going to expect them to treat it like the biggest deal ever, which was always what happens with all those quote unquote windows.
Right. The other thing I think people forget about in this equation is the consumer who gets pissed off because I pay $10 a month to Spotify. I want to get everything that's on there. If there's something on another service, I don't want to have to go spend another $10 to get just a couple of records that are on that service. So then that makes me pissed at the artist, maybe not pissed at Spotify, but then when I see it on YouTube, I'm going to go, well, fucking A, I'm going to listen to it on YouTube. I don't care if it screws over the artist because, you screwed me because I can't listen to their music that I want to hear, and I'm a fan of yours.
It abets piracy. It abets the lowest of the low in terms of revenue generation, which is YouTube. It's stupid. And honestly, you're a sophisticated consumer, obviously, but if you read like comments on social media, whenever Spotify posts anything about an artist or something, it's always like, how come you guys didn't put up the new Drake record? And we're like, you really think we don't want to put on the new Drake record? It's like, that was my most listened record a couple of years ago. Like, I would have liked nothing more than make a big deal about the new Drake record, but we didn't get it for a few weeks. So just use a hypothetical example.
Tidal is a thing unto itself. It's partially artist owned. And yes. I think what people forget about the exclusives appearing on that service is the play to the artist was put exclusive stuff here so that we get more subscribers, so that we create more value in what this company is, so that when we ultimately sell it, you're going to get a lot more money from that than you will from the incremental revenue you generate from people streaming your music. If you're Beyonce, or I don't know what their offer was to Prince or anybody like that, but if you're getting points in the company as an artist, then why wouldn't you put exclusive content there? Because if it ends up getting sold for a couple of $1 billion, your payday is going to be great.
And if Tidal ends up getting sold for a couple $1 billion, you and I will both be very surprised. But that's a great argument if you're one of the 20, the 1%er rock stars that stand to benefit. And it's not such a great argument for garage bands and bedroom DJs who aren't going to see any of that windfall. So it's just another 1%ers club. It just happens to be the 1%ers of musicians.
So here's a supposition. So in the old days, let's say a retailer wanted to buy a CD and it was $10, $11, and they sold it for $15 or $16, and they worked on margins that were, let's say, somewhere in the 30% range, 32, 33% range, right? Why is it that it is such an unjust margin in the streaming world?
Couple of reasons. And also I don't know what the latest margin numbers are, just because I'm no longer looking at those on a daily basis. But don't forget, digital services have to pay probably higher than 70% because they're not just paying the labels for the product, they're paying publishing and stuff that a record store didn't have to. So that the percentage is slightly higher. First of all, and that's as it should be. I think everyone should get paid in the digital ecosystem. Secondly, the margins aren't as good, and the investment in people and technology and constantly improving a service and constantly having to launch in new markets and stuff is very, very, very high. So it's not just we're not just looking, it's all that's great because it's all margin, that 30% or whatever it is. It's everything is plowed back into making this a viable business. And also on top of that all, it's hard to say that it's equitable because a store is a very specific transaction. Spotify and the streaming services have to maintain a customer relationship in an extremely crowded media environment, right, and battling for attention with radio, MTV, Vivo, anyone who's trying to own the ears or the eyes of a consumer is our enemies. People always used to say, "Wow, so you guys must be really competing with Pandora." We're like, Pandora's the least of it. I mean, definitely a formidable competitor and also a great service in its own rights that does something different than Spotify, although I guess they're going to try to do something more similar.
Yeah.
But I mean, we got to worry about Netflix and Hulu and YouTube. YouTube's really the king of streaming music.
Right.
And so there's a lot more competition. It's much muddier ocean. With record stores, it was kind of by definition, there's the franchisers and the small indies, and everyone kind of carved out their niche, and they all sort of competed on a much more physical basis. Whereas with us, it's it's this morass of nonstop disruption. Everyone's being disrupted, and it's expensive. I mean, we've created this technology. It took years and years. It's been around for 10 years. We were using a lot of peer-to-peer technology to transfer the files and all this stuff, and developing new technologies to serve ads and stuff. And also, the record stores did not have to pay the sort of advances that Spotify has to pay to the labels to be in business with them.
Right.
So I don't want to go off on a label bashing rant, and it's in nobody's interest to be all sledgehammery about it. But I mean, those are big numbers up front that we'd have to pay before we'd even start recouping A, and B, then that money doesn't necessarily get to the artists in the most transparent and clear way. How come we have all of our stats? Any label could go to their dashboard on Spotify and see everything they need to see about streams and artists and all this, but that transparency is not always passed to the artist by the label. A, and B, the deals that were struck. I mean, are you telling me that some artists are getting paid? If artists getting paid on streams at the same royalty rate that Too Much Joy was paid on records in the 80s, that means they're getting 13% of 0.6 of a penny.
Yeah.
And that's just not fair or sustainable.
Right.
It's just ridiculous.
I agree with you on the advances thing, although I understand why the advances thing exists, and it helps to have perspective on how new technology and the music industry came together. It came together at a time when companies were seeking licenses for content, and then we would read newspapers about how they were getting gigantic sums of investment from people or these gigantic valuations, and realizing that their survival or their worth, their perceived worth, was based on our content being licensed to them. So the label started saying, okay, well, if you're going to get my content and go out and get this multi-billion-dollar valuation, I want an advance, because I don't know if you're going to be successful, and you're going to get all this money to be successful in the beginning, but you might long-term, I don't know if you're going to be there. So if you're going to get this huge pile of cash, I want some of that cash because I'm enabling you to get that. And for a time, I think people were kind of okay with it. And then after a while, we're in a place now where the business is healthy enough where my personal feeling about it is I think it should be flat. I think it shouldn't be where if you want music to start a service, it always has to be a negotiation. I think it should be almost like a one-stop situation where you say, here's how I'm going to use the content, here's the levels of interactivity, here's how much of your catalog I want, here's the territories I'm going to launch my service in, what's the rate? And then you just start doing business. It isn't like you go sit down with a bunch of lawyers and hem and haw, and they try to figure out how much equity they should get in the company or how big an advance that they should get. Because that does make it so automatically it's not going to be a flat business, and you're only going to have a few players who have enough money to pay those exorbitant upfront licensing fees.
Obviously, Spotify was the first to crack the U.S. market. We knew that we were going to have to pay the big money to get the deals, and we did get deals. We were the first one, so we kind of like took the hit for the rest of the industry.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that Apple and Tidal probably paid some pretty big advances too. I don't really know the details of their deals, but we sort of set the model there. And not to say that we shouldn't have paid advances, or that, if the label's going to give you their whole catalog, I understand that that's valuable, but that does explain why the margin is not, helpful as it should be, and why it's harder for a digital service in this competitive environment versus a bricks and mortar retail store.
The other problem I think that we have, which maybe doesn't get focused on enough, is back to that perceived value of music. When I was a kid, you'd go to the record store and buy a couple of records, maybe $5.99, $6.99 each. If somebody came to me from the future and said, there's going to be a time when you're not going to have to buy anything, and all the music in the world is going to be at your fingertips for $10 a month, I would have been so blown away. We're in that place now.
Yes.
And maybe people don't think they're kind of, meh. Why is
that's
that?
because you and I used to buy records and spend that money. But I mean, the average consumer come 2011, when Spotify launched in the U.S., the average consumer was spending $60 a year on music, and so we were doubling that with our premium tier. But I totally, as a old school music consumer, totally agree with you. But what happened between the time you and I were going to Corvettes as kids and buying Who records to now is Napster and the internet and disruption and piracy, and music files are like the smallest media files and the easiest things to steal and share and spread around. I mean, a lot of the reason that you don't see the same disruption, everyone always says, oh, the movie industry got this right, they were so much smarter about windowing with Netflix, and that's why they're not hurting as much. I don't even know if that's true or not, but that you hear that argument a lot. I'm like, it comes down to the physics of file size. It's like when we first got on Napster in 1999, it did take like a whole night to download a record, but now it like takes a minute. A movie still takes a while, and and it cuts out if you're not in Wi-Fi. So I think there's some like very sort of logistical reasons why it's been so disrupted. I mean, when I started the internet department for Atlantic Records in 1995, one of the first things I did was wrote this extensive memo to Val Azzoli, back when people wrote memos, who was the president of Atlantic Records. And I said to Val, it's going to be very easy for people to get our music on the internet. We should probably figure out a way to watermark. And I presented, there were a couple of companies that were doing that at the time, Digimark back in the day.
Yeah, Digimark.
I think they thrive now. So they were doing their like sort of beauty calls around all the labels and stuff. We really need to take this seriously. This could become a big problem. People won't need discs anymore. And I said this in, I guess, more businessy language. I went and sat down with Val and I said, hey, so did you read my memo? He goes, yeah, thanks. It's a great memo. And I go, so what do you think? I mean, I'm very concerned about this. And he goes, you know what? I'm a shoe salesman. I sell shoes. People are still buying shoes. This company CD Now, people pay more to get the Tori Amos record on release day through CD Now. And I'm like, okay, cool. And that was kind of the beginning of my end of my career in the record industry. So that's what happened. It got disrupted. So people were expecting to pay nothing.
People talk about this 150 million paying streaming subscribers is like the magic number. Do you think that it's an achievable number?
It's definitely achievable. I mean, if you think about it, the online audience and the fact that Facebook has 1.2 billion users now.
Yeah.
It should be pretty achievable. All of those people listen to music, and a lot of those people want to be able to have some say in what music they listen to and where. I mean, that's it. Portability and on demand are the things that convert people from YouTube users and free Spotify users into paying users.
If we hit that number, how do you think things would change for artists and for companies like Spotify?
Well, obviously the pie gets bigger. I don't think this whole vision of the long tail has played out as much as we'd all hoped in terms of like more obscure people getting more exposure. I mean, there's still, a concentration of streams and the superstars, and there always will be. I mean, it's always going to be a hits driven business. But if more people are paying, and listening and paying streaming rates, that becomes real. And one of the best things that starting to trend on Spotify does for artists, especially artists who tour, is it sells tickets. It gets people in clubs. I mean, even right when Spotify in 2011, when it launched, I was working with a couple of bands. I remember the rap group Das Racist had just released their kind of big record and their first record. I was like, so what are you hearing? Is it helping? Are you seeing any activity? He goes, everybody we talked to at the clubs after our show says they heard us on Spotify. So that's where they're learning about us. And even if they're free users, it still got them to the club. And again, I'm a big believer in the vibrancy and the importance of having a vibrant live scene. And I think we are aiding and abetting that in a big way. And it's certainly, we're hearing that from artists.
Do you think that YouTube is a barrier to hitting that 150 million number because they offer much of the same content for free?
Yes, they definitely are. When people beat us up about the free tier, when labels beat us up, we're like, get YouTube out of the free business first. There's a reason why everyone's ganging up on YouTube about this. And one of the reasons they can is because Spotify's become a big source of revenue for them. But one of the reasons they are is because it's like a double-edged sword. They're trying to they want to beat down our free tier. So we're saying, well, come on. Everyone should play by the same rules.
Okay, so you know the game Marry, Fuck, Kill?
Sure.
Okay, so Marry, Fuck, Kill, freemium, YouTube's current offering, and paid downloads. Which one do you marry? Which one do you fuck? And which one do you kill?
Oh, that's a really hard utilization of this game. YouTube's current thing, which definitely everyone wants to kill that. Everyone, think it's just not fair. Downloads versus paid versus freemium.
Yeah.
If I'm a band member, I marry downloads, but I'll fuck freemium. I won't make a commitment, but I'll fuck it because people are going to come to the club or go to the show or hear my song in a commercial and want to hear it again. I mean, ultimately, if you're a band, you'll make the most money from downloads in the near term. However, over time, we see this time and time again, and you can ask any of the classic rock bands that I helped launch on the service, like Zeppelin or Floyd, the long-term returns on streaming are just amazing. It's like an annuity, and the numbers keep going up. And if you find small ways to keep your music current or reissue it, or maybe engage in promotions directly with Spotify to get people, engaged on album anniversaries and such, that's going to be your biggest revenue stream over time. Downloads feels it's a little more like in the moment temporal revenue.
Yeah, and I think once you start engaging with streaming, the download just makes absolutely no sense at all. If you're a paid subscriber to a streaming service, why would you ever buy a download, really? Unless the music wasn't available on the streaming service. That's the only reason I could see buying it.
I mean, I buy a ton of stuff from Bandcamp because I like obscure punk rock who like either make it a point not to be on Spotify or don't know how to use TuneCore. I'm not sure what it is. Sometimes they make a point of it. Sometimes there's this great band I love, Gloss, GLOSS, which is this trans lady punk hardcore band, and it stands for Girls Living Outside Society shit. And for a while their EP was on Spotify and was the happiest man in the world, and now I see that they've taken it off recently, so it did force me to go buy it because I missed not hearing it. But that's just a bad model because I'm a super fan, but for a casual fan they'll just okay, fuck it, Gloss isn't on here, who's a recommended artist that sounds like them? Oh, Downtown Boys, okay, I'll go listen to them. So people have to be careful with that stuff. Make your decision and then live by it. There's a band, another obscure DC punk band called Puff Pieces. as far as I can tell, or last time I checked, their music's still not on Spotify. So yeah, I had to download it from Bandcamp, and that's fine. But over time, if they want to get more exposure, they're going to want to give the audience of 100 million monthly listeners on Spotify the opportunity to come across their band. And don't think that just because you're an obscure like post-punk band with a guy who sounds like David Byrne singing for you, that you're never going to reach a mass audience on Spotify, because guess what? Everyone who listens to Gang of Four, Minutemen, or early Talking Heads might get recommended a Puff Pieces track in a radio station or on a playlist.
But I think those artists, to be honest with you, I think that what they may be thinking is, okay, I'll get all this exposure, but when I read that some artist got 10 million plays and got 40 grand, or I read an artist got 1 million plays and got $16 or something like that, why should I even bother?
Yeah, no, you listen, I'm not one to try to understand, try to speak for indie startup bands' motivations for keeping their things off of Spotify. A lot of times I don't think it's just about, oh, we're not going to make any money anyways. I think it's more like it's not the place we want our music to be, yet we deliberately want to make people have to come to us and on Bandcamp, because it's not like they're going to make enough money on Bandcamp to like fund their lives. I mean, they might make enough to put some gas in the van for touring, which is an admirable thing, which is, a great way to do it. But a lot of those stories like, 20 million plays and they only got a 2-cent check. One has to look at those stories story by story. Sometimes it's a songwriter. There is something to be said about labels and publishers coming up with a better way to split revenues between the recording artist and the songwriter. I think that probably does need to be disrupted in a way. I think those two pieces of pie probably need to be recalibrated amongst themselves. The other thing I'd say is, what is your deal with your label? If you're only getting, if you're an artist, a recording artist, and you're saying, my label revenues are only X, well, what deal, what royalty rate are you getting paid at? Are you getting paid at the beggar's banquet royalty rate, which is somewhere in 40-50%, whatever that they've announced, or are you getting paid at like you signed a record deal in 1980 and you're getting a 13% of 0.6 of a penny? And then also, what about the rest of your record deal? Did you do a 360 deal? Are they recouping against tour support that you didn't even realize, or did you have them make like even a $50,000 video, which back in the day you and I would have laughed at that budget. Nowadays it's expensive,
Yeah.
But 50% of that goes back against the band. So I would ask all those questions before I subscribe to all those stories about I only got 4 cents and I sold 20 million. I had 20 million streams.
You and I grew up in a time where you would go to a good indie record store and
Yes.
the person behind the counter knew you, and they'd be like, "Oh, dude, this new thing is out," and you'd say, "I've been really into this lately." And you go, "Oh, well, then you should check out this other band," and you'd get these really, really rich recommendations. Or you'd listen to a college radio station and they'd play an hour of music that maybe on the face of it should not have worked as a playlist because it was totally different genres and was all mixed up, but the person played all this stuff that really expanded your musical horizons. Now, those things have, in large part, they're going away because of societal changes, because of economic changes. What is replacing them are things like Spotify. Are we ever going to get to a place where streaming music services can be as good at discovery and recommendation as a good old indie record store or a good college radio show?
The thing that we loved about college radio and good indie record stores is not scalable, and that is like, I think you can get close, but it's not quite scalable. That sort of like human trustworthiness and like, oh my god, this guy always knows my taste. The guy who like told me to buy Public Image Limited second edition when I was kind of burned out on them and convinced me to buy it and said it was like a life-changing record. Like, Spotify, no digital service is going to be able to replicate that sort of human emotional connection ever. I'm not a lover of algorithms, but I have to say Discover Weekly is as I think is state of the art. Sometimes they present artists or songs that I have listened to, and I go like, well, they know I've listened to that. But there's actually a method behind that madness. They do want to have a modicum of known stuff on the playlist so that it doesn't feel completely alien to people. So it's not only stuff you've never heard by only artists you've never heard. There actually is some science behind it. And, I'm hard pressed to think of a better algorithmically generated recommendation thing than that. What I do is I still feel like there's a thriving economy or a thriving world for music blogs, music recommendations, Twitter feeds by people that I respect. I read Noisy every day. I think they do a really good job. I mean, sometimes it's a bit hit or miss, but a lot of times I learn about new bands. It's through someone like a Noisy, or someone will say, "Oh, so and so got an 8 on Pitchfork," and a lot of times I don't like the bands that get the 8, but I'll go to Pitchfork and then I get down the rabbit hole and I see a band that only got a 4, but based on the description, I liked it. So I still use critical media to find out about new music, and also word of mouth, and a lot of times my favorite bands that are still performing have great opening bands, and that's another great way to like go down a rabbit hole. Those are all the ways, I find out about new music. I don't think algorithms will ever be as good as our favorite record store clerk, unfortunately.
Would it make any sense to go to Noisy or go to the guys at Other Music who are going to have a lot of free time at the end of the month?
Yeah, poor guys. Yeah.
And say, hey guys, we want you to curate a playlist, open up Other Music as a independent music playlist channel, and we'll rev share with you, and you'll be able to make a living as a couple of guys who can recommend great music on Spotify.
Definitely. I mean, we launched a series in the last year and a half called In Residence, where we got like Mix Mag and Big Narsty over in the UK, and I even had Hannibal Buress do one of the shows just because he has really great taste in hip hop, where they would do like those sorts of, here's some really cool shit you might not know about. Brooklyn Vegan was doing one, and it was more like the model was annotated playlists. So it felt like a live radio show. Spotify's getting better with the tools that will enable you to mix a playlist so that it feels smoother and more like radio, and less like here's a spoken track, here's a music track. Those tools are always being improved and have been improved in some of the running tools that you've seen come out. Mm-hmm. But I think it makes a ton of sense. And I can't think of better people to hire as curators than dudes from Other Music and dudes and dudettes from Other Music, or all these stores that are closing. Rebel's just closing. Yeah. It's heartbreaking, and I do think they should have a role in that. If I were still there, I would definitely make a play for that. That's a great idea.
Could you think that there would be a possibility that they actually might be able to share in whatever the limited revenue there is to share on that? Like if they brought an advertiser and said, hey, I've got a sponsor for this, or maybe you could connect them with advertisers and say, we're going to do a show, we're going to do a playlist, and then instead of doing it all through the label, you do it with a partner and do a rev share? Is that a possibility, do you think?
That's a business decision for people who I don't control their business decisions. Should it be possible? In theory, yes. I mean, ultimately, to really succeed and thrive and have like a foothold, I think all these services are going to have to expand their original content offerings. I'm not just saying that because that's what I did at Spotify, and that's what I'm doing now in my podcast world. But I'm saying it because I feel like, again, in a perfect world, everyone has the new Radiohead album, but what's some content that's not based off of licensed material? What's some content or what's some context that we can put around the music that you can only get from Spotify? What's Spotify's pop-up video, for instance? So what's Spotify's Beavis and Butthead? So where the licensed music was kind of like the least important piece of the puzzle, yet it couldn't exist without it. So those to me are more probable and potentially more fruitful business models than compensating curators for playlisting.
So that's a good segue to talk about what you are doing now. You're doing something in the podcasting world that sounds pretty exciting, and I know you and I talked about how excited we both are about podcasting. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're doing?
Sure. So having left Spotify early this year, I really wanted to double down into the world of podcasting because I think, like you, I feel like there's something very breakthrough and punk rock about it, and the directness and the way in which you can really get into people's heads literally and figuratively with audio. And so that's what I'm focusing on now. I'm producing my own podcast. I'm producing podcasts for media companies and brands, and I'm partnering with some folks to bring to life a couple of different series of podcasts and working sort of like, instead of like a movie studio or a TV studio, it's like a podcast studio. So, we'll put together a franchise and develop it and then like license it out to media company or X or media company Y. I mean, it's nascent, but there's so much going on, but a lot of it I can't announce it, which is just so frustrating because it's good stuff. But over the next 3 to 6 months, you'll see I'll be putting out announcements and shows will be launching either independently through my company, which is called Audio Audiation, Audiation, or through like third-party media companies and brands. So it's like, creating amazing, authentic audio content that's not out there right now.
Okay, so if people want to keep aware of what you're doing with your new company, how do they follow you?
Yeah, Twitter handle Audiation, Audiation, and my website is launching. It's in beta now. Audiation.fm.
All right, so 2 last questions, and we'll let you go because I know I've kept you way longer than I was supposed to. If you had a green field, how would you fix it? What would today's music business look like to you if there were no rules, no preset conditions, and you were setting it up?
It would look a lot more like Kickstarter, crowdfunding, and 100% transparency, the transparency of the sort that you get from a company like Cobalt, or when you go to Facebook to see your analytics for something that you don't even pay for. So it would be more broadly funded, and it would be more transparent, and I would make sure that the people in the ecosystem who are the true artist developers and the true marketers, the people, they would have a piece of the investment and be rewarded for the success. Because I think those are all the things that have fallen by the wayside, and that's why labels don't value artist development people anymore. And now managers do it. So that's because they are going to win and profit in the success of the artist in proportion to their contribution. So adjusting how people are compensated, adjusting the transparency, and adjusting how recordings and artists are funded. Those would be the 3 things I do.
Amazing answer. That's great. All right, last question.
Yep.
Recommend a record people should go out and buy right now.
See, now I like some wacky shit. So
I love wacky shit. My whole record collection's wacky shit. So go ahead, get crazy, get buck wild. That's what I want.
It's not even that wacky. Okay, you know what? I'm gonna say, it's not even that wacky. I mean, Chris Scott loves it too, but Well, I'm gonna recommend. Can I do 2 or do I?
Yeah, go ahead. No, that's great. 2's great.
I'm a big fan of Wussy, Wussy, which is one of the last great rock bands. I believe they're from Cleveland, and some of the members used to be in the band the Ass Ponies. They have a new record out that is fantastic called Forever Sounds, and it's just like rocky and grindy and like a female vocalist and a male vocalist interplay. It's all the things I like about sort of like rock music. That's one. And then on hip hop tip, I would love people to be listening to Skepta. I don't know how obscure that is anymore. Konnichiwa, the album. It's just like dance hall inflected hip hop, and he's just so cool. And it's one of the few hip hop records I've listened to in a while where the skits actually make me laugh and don't annoy me.
Cool.
So I'm going to go with those 2.
Great. Awesome. Well, Sandy, I cannot thank you enough for being on the show. It was fascinating, and all it made me do was think, when should I invite you back so we can talk about this stuff more? Thank you so much, man. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks, Jim. Great chatting with you, my man.
All right, that's going to do it for this episode of How to Fix the Music Business. Thanks to our special guest, Sandy Smallens, for spending all that time with us. Thank you for listening to a long but hopefully rewarding podcast. If you like the show, please do leave us a positive review on iTunes. It helps more people find it. And check our website, howtofixthemusicbusiness.com, for notes on this episode, including the bands that Sandy was talking about and various other fun stuff. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.